All characters and events are fictional. Any resemblance is coincidental. And if you believe every lie eventually leaves proof, stay with me. The phone vibrated against my thigh. Once, short, controlled, deliberate, not the chaotic buzz of spam, not the accidental tap of a notification. It felt intentional. I didn't look down, not because I wasn't curious, because I was standing beside my husband's coffin. Polished mahogany, white roses arranged too perfectly, 200 people dressed in curated grief. The priest was speaking about eternal rest, about how God sometimes calls the good ones home early, about mysterious timing. But I wasn't listening because the vibration came again, longer this time, and something inside me shifted. The phone in my coat pocket was Daniel's, my husband's, the man who supposedly died 3 days ago in a single vehicle collision on Highway 27. Closed casket, severe trauma, they said. I had signed the release forms without shaking. I had cried at the hospital. I had collapsed once, convincingly enough that even I almost believed it. But this wasn't grief. This was interference. I slid my hand into my coat pocket slowly, carefully. The screen lit up against the dark lining of the fabric. Unknown number. 3 words. It's done. She suspects nothing. My pulse didn't spike. It slowed. That's what clarity does. Grief is loud. It crushes your ribs. It floods your throat. But clarity narrows the world into a single sharp line. And in that moment, standing beside my husband's coffin, I understood something terrifying. The funeral wasn't the end, it was the middle. I lifted my eyes slowly. Daniel's business partner stood near the back row, too calm. His older brother stared at the floor like eye contact would be incriminating. And then I saw him, Daniel's attorney, watching me. Not the priest, not the coffin, me. That was my first confirmation. He wasn't monitoring grief. He was monitoring reaction. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I didn't cry harder. I didn't gasp. I let the ceremony continue. Because when someone believes you suspect nothing, you gain leverage. After the final prayer, people lined up to hug me. Soft voices. I can't imagine what you're going through. Neither could I. Because whatever this wasn't lost anymore. It was orchestration. When the chapel emptied, I approached the coffin. The funeral director stepped forward gently. We're preparing for burial. Of course they were. I placed my hand on the polished wood. Cold, solid, final. And then something clicked. I had never seen his body. Not in the hospital. Not during identification. They told me it was too severe, too traumatic. Closed casket recommended. Shock makes compliance easy. But now I wanted to see him. I need to confirm something, I said quietly. The director hesitated. It's really not advisable, I insist. My voice didn't tremble. That unsettled him more than hysteria would have. The coffin was moved into a private preparation room. The priest followed. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough to lean close and whisper. He isn't inside. The world didn't tilt. It clarified. What do you mean? I asked. The weight is wrong, he said softly. I've carried coffins for 30 years. Wrong weight. Such a small detail. The lid was loosened, lifted, white satin interior, perfectly arranged. Empty, no Daniel, no body, just folded fabric where a man was supposed to be. I didn't scream, because screaming is for shock, and this wasn't shock. This was structure. When did the coffin arrive? I asked. Yesterday morning, the director replied. Who signed for it? He checked the paperwork. Your husband's attorney. There it was. Thread number 1. The phone vibrated again. I didn't need to read it. I already knew. Instead, I asked for security footage. The funeral home resisted. I calmly mentioned federal penalties for transporting remains across county lines without verification. Resistance stopped. The footage showed the hearse arriving. 2 men unloading the coffin, Daniel's attorney present, But when the rear doors opened, the compartment was empty. They delivered a shell. No one checked. Because grief makes people trust documentation, I stepped outside into the cold air. The burial was postponed. Whispers began. Daniel's attorney approached me carefully. This must be a clerical error. Clerical, another small word hiding something large. I pulled Daniel's phone from my pocket and held it up. His eyes shifted. Not surprise, calculation. You've been receiving messages, he said. Not a question, a statement. So have you, I replied. That's when I understood the second layer. Daniel wasn't dead, he was migrating. 3 days earlier, he had kissed my forehead before leaving for a late meeting. 48 hours later, I was signing death documentation. Insurance policies had been activated 2 days before the crash. Joint accounts drained in staggered increments under reporting thresholds. Estate release forms prepared in advance. The accident report was real. The car existed. The damage existed. The blood inside it didn't match Daniel's DNA. He had switched drivers, paid someone desperate enough to disappear, and I had been expected to finalize the performance. If I signed everything, his death would be permanent on paper. Funds transferred, identity shifted, new passport activated, and I would grieve a ghost. But Daniel made one mistake. He texted too soon. He assumed emotional collapse would override suspicion. He forgot what I do for a living. My name is Ava Hart. I'm 36 years old. I work in compliance, paper trails, signature verification, timestamp integrity, patterns. Daniel always said I overthought things. What he meant was, I noticed, 3 days after the funeral, authorities intercepted him at a private charter terminal. Different state, different jacket, different haircut, same face. When they brought him back, he didn't look shocked. He looked irritated. You were supposed to sign the release, he said quietly when we were finally face to face. Release, that word again. He thought the paperwork would protect him. He thought I would protect him. You texted too soon, I told him. And for the first time since I had known him, he looked uncertain, but that uncertainty wasn't fear. It was adjustment. Because Daniel had contingencies, and I hadn't even seen them yet. Daniel didn't panic. That was the first thing I noticed when they brought him back. No sweat, no shaking hands, no dramatic denial. He looked inconvenienced, like someone who had just missed a flight, not someone who had faked his own death. They placed him in a holding room first, not a cell, not yet. His attorney argued procedural language before criminal language. I waited, because this wasn't about anger. It was about structure. When they finally allowed me into the interview room, Daniel was sitting exactly the way he used to sit at our dining table. Relaxed, one ankle over his knee, hands folded, controlled. You shouldn't have pushed this, he said calmly. Not I'm sorry. Not this is a misunderstanding. You shouldn't have pushed this. Like I had disrupted something larger than him. Where were you going? I asked. He smiled slightly. Does it matter? Yes, it mattered. Because disappearing is one thing, reappearing somewhere else is another. I already filed the insurance claim, I said. That was the first flicker. Insurance. Now we were speaking in language he respected. You shouldn't have, he replied. And yet you triggered it 2 days before the accident. Silence. He hadn't expected me to notice the timestamp. Daniel leaned forward. Do you really want to know how deep this goes? There it was. The first open loop, not how I did it. How deep this goes. Plural. Layers. The investigators re-entered before he could continue. He was escorted out, temporary holding. No formal charges yet. The attorney was buying time, and time meant cleanup. That's when I went home, because something felt wrong. Not emotionally, logistically. Our house looked untouched, too untouched. Daniel had always been meticulous, minimalist, organized. But now the organization felt rehearsed, like someone had reset a stage. I went straight to his office. His laptop was gone, but the docking station remained, careless or arrogant. I opened the drawer where he kept old external drives. One was missing, the oldest one. The one he always said contained archived client backups. I sat in his chair, and I did something Daniel never expected me to do. I audited my own marriage. Not bank accounts first. Behavior. 6 months before his death, he had moved assets into a trust with accelerated access clauses, updated beneficiary designations quietly, requested certified copies of my signature from previous filings, ordered 3 replacement credit cards lost in transit, purchased a second phone. Business line, he said. The second phone number matched the unknown text. I froze, because the message wasn't about escape. It's done. She suspects nothing. She, not you, not Ava. She, which meant I wasn't the intended recipient, which meant there was another woman in this equation, not an affair, a collaborator. And then I remembered something. 2 weeks before the accident, Daniel had introduced me to someone at a fundraiser. Just a consultant, he said. Her name was Dr. Meredith Lane, financial strategist, disaster asset protection specialist. She had shaken my hand firmly, looked directly into my eyes, and said, "You seem very stable." At the time I thought it was small talk. Now it sounded like evaluation. I pulled public records. Meredith Lane had filed incorporation documents for a shell company in Nevada 5 months ago. Daniel Cross was not listed, but a holding entity was. The holding entity matched the trust Daniel created, which meant the fake death wasn't spontaneous. It was structural, insurance payout, offshore transfer, identity shift. But there was a problem. The car accident, the body, the driver, someone had died. The blood in the vehicle belonged to a man named Thomas Keene, 32, recently unemployed, outstanding debts. Last known employment, subcontractor under Daniel's firm. Thomas had no family contesting the death, which meant Daniel didn't just disappear. He replaced himself. That realization changed everything, because now this wasn't fraud. It was manslaughter, possibly murder. I contacted the lead investigator. I didn't accuse. I asked questions. "What's the status of the autopsy?" I asked. "There wasn't one," he said. "Closed casket." ID confirmed through dental records. Dental records. Provided by whom? Daniel's private dentist. Connected to the same legal firm handling his estate. Layers. This wasn't a desperate man faking death. This was a network. And then something else clicked. The priest, the weight. He said the coffin was wrong. If Daniel never entered the coffin, then who verified the remains at the hospital? The hospital released a sealed transfer, signed by a nurse named Carla Voss. Carla had resigned the day after the release, no forwarding address, but her LinkedIn profile still existed, and it listed a previous employer, Meredith Lane Consulting. That's when the pattern became undeniable. This wasn't escape. It was migration supported by professionals. Daniel had created his own death certificate. But here's the problem with men who plan too carefully. They underestimate patience. I didn't confront the investigators with conclusions. I handed them threads, individually, timestamp inconsistencies, signature overlaps, insurance activation timeline, consulting entity cross-filings. They began to see it slowly, but Daniel was released within 48 hours. Technicalities, insufficient immediate evidence. He walked out in the same suit, same posture, and he looked at me across the parking lot, not angry, curious, like I had just become interesting. "You're late," he said quietly. "Late for what?" "For realizing you weren't the only one being managed." That sentence lingered long after he drove away. Managed, not manipulated, managed. Which meant I wasn't just a wife in this plan. I was an asset, and assets can be reassigned. That night, I received another message from the unknown number. This time it was longer. "You were never the target. You were the shield. The world didn't spin." It narrowed again. Shield. Protection from what? I searched deeper into Daniel's firm. 2 clients had recently been under federal audit. Both high-risk accounts. both flagged for offshore tax movement, and both transferred to the Nevada shell entity weeks before Daniel's accident, which meant his fake death wasn't only about money, it was about liability. He was transferring blame, and I was the registered executor of the estate. If the investigation expanded, everything would root through me, not him. He didn't just fake death. He staged responsibility. That was the real plan. And now I understood why he wasn't afraid. Because from a distance, he wasn't the criminal. I was. Continue to Part 3 Continua, Perfito, Continuando. Parte 3 Escalada Conspiração Médica plus Financiera, Open Loops Estratégicos. The moment I understood that I was the shield, everything changed, because a shield doesn't get protected, a shield gets used. I went back through every document tied to Daniel's estate, every form I signed at the hospital, every release, every confirmation. And that's when I found it. One line, buried in the digital authorization log. A timestamp showing that I had electronically confirmed the body identification at 3:14 a.m. There was only one problem. At 3:14 a.m., I was sedated. I had collapsed in the hospital hallway. They had given me something, just to calm you down. I remember the nurse's voice, soft, reassuring. Carla Voss, the same nurse who signed off on the body transfer. My digital signature had been authorized while I was medically sedated, which meant two things. One, they needed my confirmation. Two, they couldn't risk me being conscious when it happened. I requested the hospital's internal access logs. They stalled, privacy policies, administrative delays. But once law enforcement formally requested them, the logs came through. And that's when the real fracture appeared. The patient wristband ID in the morgue intake system had been altered, not deleted, altered. The barcode linked to Daniel Cross had been reassigned to Thomas Keene at 2:58 a.m. 16 minutes before my signature. That wasn't chaos, that was choreography. Someone inside the hospital had swapped the identities digitally before the physical transfer. And now the swap had a paper trail. But here's the terrifying part. It required more than one person. One person doesn't override morgue intake. One person doesn't reassign digital barcodes. One person doesn't sedate a spouse at exactly the right time. This wasn't a nurse acting alone. This was procedural, organized, and funded. I sat in my car outside the hospital for a long time that night. Not crying, not shaking, thinking. Daniel wasn't improvising. He was extracting himself from something bigger than insurance fraud, because no one builds this level of cover just to run away with a consulting strategist. He was disappearing before something arrived, which meant I needed to know what was coming. I contacted the investigator again, but this time I didn't bring accusations. I brought a question. Have there been any federal subpoenas tied to Daniel's firm in the last year? There was a pause. Then, how did you know about that? Because patterns leave dents. Daniel's firm had been flagged quietly, not public, not charged, but flagged. Large capital movement offshore, 3 clients under sealed review, and 1 internal whistleblower complaint filed 9 months ago. The whistleblower's name? Thomas Keene, the same man who died in Daniel's place. The room inside my chest went cold. Thomas wasn't random, he wasn't collateral, he was a problem. Daniel didn't fake his death to escape marriage. He faked his death to bury the whistleblower. Literally, the accident wasn't random. Thomas's employment records showed a company vehicle assignment the night of the crash, assigned by Daniel. And the GPS logs, disabled 2 hours before impact. Thomas's toxicology report showed sedatives in his bloodstream. The same sedative administered to me at the hospital. This wasn't migration, it was cleanup. And Daniel wasn't the only one involved. Because covering a financial whistleblower requires access to vehicle logs, employee records, hospital intake systems, dental file transfers, insurance coordination, digital estate filings. No one man moves that alone. I met the investigator in a neutral space, not the station, not my house. We laid out the pattern like surgeons reviewing scans. He didn't interrupt. He didn't comfort. He analyzed, and then he said something that made my pulse slow. "You're not the shield anymore." That meant they were shifting perspective. Daniel was no longer just a grieving husband miraculously alive. He was potentially orchestrating obstruction, but we were still missing one link. Meredith Lane, the consultant. Her firm had filed dissolution paperwork for the Nevada shell entity 48 hours after Daniel's release. Too fast. Which meant she knew exposure was imminent. And exposure only comes when someone inside starts to talk. I checked one more record. Thomas Keene's phone metadata. There were encrypted communications between Thomas and an external contact. The contact ID matched Meredith's business number, which meant the whistleblower didn't just report internally. He reached outside. Meredith wasn't just helping Daniel escape, she was managing narrative damage. Then the final piece landed. A forensic accountant flagged something unusual. One life insurance rider had been increased 3 weeks before the accident. But not on Daniel, on me. My name had been quietly added to a supplemental accidental death rider. Daniel had increased a payout tied to my death. That changed the equation entirely, because if the fake death had gone clean, I would have been next. He needed me alive long enough to sign, long enough to stabilize the estate, long enough to absorb liability. And then, a tragic widow follows her husband in grief. 2 insurance payouts. 1 sealed investigation. No whistleblower, no living spouse, clean slate. That's when I finally understood the message. You were never the target. You were the shield, until the shield was no longer needed. I sat in my house that night in complete silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels loaded. Daniel thought he had migrated. He thought the plan was still intact, but plans built on control collapse when the wrong person starts auditing. And I had one advantage he didn't expect. He thought I was emotional. He forgot I was procedural. I didn't confront him. I didn't accuse. I let the investigation expand quietly. Subpoenas widened. Hospital administrators were interviewed. Carla Voss resurfaced, under pressure. And when she spoke, she didn't defend Daniel. She defended procedure. He told us it was authorized. He, not we. That fracture is how conspiracies break. The moment someone chooses self-preservation over loyalty. Meredith disappeared. Her firm went offline, but financial freeze orders locked associated accounts before transfers cleared. Daniel's offshore entity was flagged. And then we set the trap. Because Daniel still believed he was ahead. He agreed to meet me. Private location, controlled tone. He thought he could recalibrate me. He thought he could reassign my role. When he sat down across from me, he smiled. "You've made this complicated," he said. Complicated, that word again. "You were supposed to be safe," he added. Safe? That's when I knew. He wasn't sorry. He was frustrated that I didn't die on schedule. He leaned closer. "You don't understand who you're pulling into this." There it was, another layer, which meant Daniel wasn't at the top. He was mid-level, and mid-level men panic when structure above them trembles. "You won't win this," he said quietly. I didn't respond, because he still thought this was about winning, and that was his final mistake. The evidence wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was chronological. Insurance increase, GPS disablement, sedative correlation, wristband reassignment, whistleblower timeline, identity swap, and intent to eliminate secondary liability. When they brought Daniel in the second time, it wasn't about fraud, it was about obstruction, tied to a federal financial inquiry. Different jurisdiction, different tone. No more parking lot smirks, no more calm posture. Because when federal investigators step in, escape plans collapse. He looked at me once in the hallway, and for the first time, he wasn't curious. He was calculating survival, and he realized something too late. I wasn't grieving, I was auditing. Daniel always believed pressure revealed weakness. That's why he smiled in crisis. That's why he spoke softly when other men raised their voices. He thought stillness meant control, but in the federal interview rooms, stillness meant something else. It meant containment. They didn't accuse him immediately. They didn't need to. They laid out dates, transfers, metadata, vehicle reassignment, insurance riders, timestamp anomalies, not as drama, as sequence. And sequence is lethal, because sequence doesn't argue. It connects. Daniel tried to redirect. He tried to make it about Thomas. He was unstable. He tried to make it about me. My wife is emotional. He tried to make it about corporate structure. You don't understand how layered these entities are. They didn't debate him. They asked one question. Why was the life insurance rider on your wife increased 3 weeks before your declared death? He paused. Not long, but long enough, and in investigations, pauses are evidence. He pivoted. Financial planning. The agent didn't blink. And the GPS disablement, maintenance issue. And the sedative correlation between the victim and your wife. Coincidence? He kept speaking, and every answer made the structure smaller, narrower, until there was only one corridor left: intent. They brought in Thomas Keene's file, not as accusation, as timeline. Thomas filed a sealed whistleblower report. Thomas's access privileges were reduced. Thomas was assigned a late-night vehicle. Thomas's GPS was disabled. Thomas died in a collision. Daniel declared dead 3 days later. Insurance processed within 48 hours. Offshore entity dissolved within 72. Daniel resurfaced when exposure risk escalated. There's a moment in every investigation where denial stops sounding confident and starts sounding rehearsed. That was the moment his jaw tightened. Not anger, recognition. Because Daniel finally understood what he had miscalculated. He thought the danger was emotional exposure, infidelity, public scandal, divorce. He never imagined the audit would go backwards. Past the marriage, past the affair, into the firm, into the sealed complaint, into the structure he thought was invisible. And the thing about invisible structures, they leave shadows. The federal inquiry expanded, not publicly, not loudly, quietly, the way real collapses happen. Accounts froze, subpoenas widened, board members distanced themselves. Meredith Lane negotiated immunity within days. And when she did, the final layers surfaced. Daniel wasn't the architect, he was the executor. There were 3 names above his in the chain: senior partners, political donors, men who don't attend funerals, they attend hearings. And Daniel had agreed to manage liability, which meant when Thomas filed the complaint, Daniel's job was containment. The fake death wasn't escape, it was stage 1. The second stage was scheduled 3 weeks later. A grieving widow fatal accident, same highway, different car, same insurance provider, 2 payouts, case closed. The sedative in my bloodstream wasn't compassion, it was rehearsal. And Daniel had one final miscalculation. He believed I would panic once I knew. He thought fear would make me retreat. But fear does something else when it's processed slowly. It sharpens. I didn't confront him when the full plan surfaced. I let the prosecution build, layer by layer: conspiracy, obstruction, insurance fraud, federal financial concealment, accessory to manslaughter. And when Daniel finally understood the scope, he stopped negotiating. He started bargaining, but not with me, with them. He offered the names above him, the 3 partners. He offered financial maps, offshore vault coordinates, encrypted archives. And the moment he shifted into cooperation, he lost the only thing he ever valued: control. The trial wasn't theatrical. There were no dramatic gasps, just documentation, timestamps, sedative correlations, insurance riders, GPS disablement logs, wristband reassignment records, whistleblower communications, and one audio clip retrieved from Thomas Keene's encrypted archive. A voicemail, Daniel's voice. "You're forcing my hand." That sentence ended him. not emotionally, structurally. Because forcing my hand establishes intent, and intent establishes criminal alignment. The 3 senior partners were indicted. Meredith testified. Carla Voss accepted a plea agreement. Daniel sat through sentencing without looking at me, until the judge read the term. That's when he looked up, not angry, not apologetic, trying to understand how sequence beats strategy. As they let him out, he finally spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for me to hear. You weren't supposed to see it. That's when I answered, calm, measured. I wasn't supposed to survive it. He didn't respond, because he understood the difference. The world didn't explode when the verdict came down. It corrected. His firm dissolved, assets seized, insurance claims nullified, the estate restructured under federal supervision. Thomas Keene's family received restitution. The whistleblower file was unsealed, and the senior partners who thought they operated above visibility were brought into it, publicly. As for me, people expect closure to feel loud, victorious, triumphant. It isn't. Closure is quiet. It's standing in your own kitchen, without checking your reflection in the window for headlights. It's sleeping without calculating escape routes. It's knowing that the next vibration in your pocket is just a phone, not a conspiracy. Daniel believed power was about positioning. I learned something else. Power is about sequence. You don't win by screaming. You win by letting them finish talking, by letting them build the trap they assume is yours. And then, you close it. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to The Final Evidence, because every lie leaves proof. The 3 senior partners were indicted. Meredith testified. Carla Voss accepted a plea agreement. Daniel sat through sentencing without looking at me, until the judge read the term. That's when he looked up, not angry, not apologetic, trying to understand how sequence beats strategy. As they let him out, he finally spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for me to hear. You weren't supposed to see it. That's when I answered, calm, measured. I wasn't supposed to survive it. He didn't respond because he understood the difference. The world didn't explode when the verdict came down. It corrected. His firm dissolved, assets seized, insurance claims nullified, the estate restructured under federal supervision. Thomas Keene's family received restitution. The whistleblower file was unsealed, and the senior partners who thought they operated above visibility were brought into it, publicly. As for me, people expect closure to feel loud, victorious, triumphant. It isn't. Closure is quiet. It's standing in your own kitchen without checking your reflection in the window for headlights. It's sleeping without calculating escape routes. It's knowing that the next vibration in your pocket is just a phone, not a conspiracy. Daniel believed power was about positioning. I learned something else. Power is about sequence. You don't win by screaming. You win by letting them finish talking, by letting them build the trap they assume is yours, and then you close it. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to The Final Evidence, because every lie leaves proof.